There are things a person carries for years before they finally set them down, not because they forgot, not because the weight became bearable, but because the moment never felt safe enough, or right enough, or over enough to speak the truth out loud. Kelly Clarkson carried something like that for a long time. And for years, the world only got pieces of it. The headline about the divorce filing, the legal battles over a Montana ranch, the custody arrangements, the name change, fragments. Surface-level facts handed to the press like carefully rationed breadcrumbs. What the public saw was a woman moving forward. What they didn't see was everything she had been moving away from. Because here's what almost no one knew about Brandon Blackstock. Not the tabloids, not the entertainment reporters, not even the people closest to Kelly. There was a version of that marriage that existed behind every photograph of them, smiling on a red carpet. A version that Kelly herself had buried so deep, so deliberately, that she began to wonder if she had imagined it. She hadn't. And the moment she finally began to speak, it became clear that the real story of their relationship had never actually been told. Not until now. To understand what Kelly revealed, you have to understand who she was before Brandon ever entered the picture. Because the woman who fell in love with him wasn't a polished, self-assured superstar. She was someone still healing, still reaching back into a childhood that had handed her abandonment like a birthright. Kelly Brianne Clarkson grew up in Burleson, Texas, in a house where love came and went like weather. She was 6 years old when her father walked out, not metaphorically, literally packed up and left, leaving Kelly with her mother while her siblings were distributed elsewhere, her brother to their father, her sister to an aunt. The family scattered like cards thrown across a table. That kind of fracturing doesn't heal cleanly. It leaves a scar that reshapes everything that comes after. Every relationship, every audition, every desperate reach toward someone who might finally stay. She carried that wound through the chaos of American Idol, through the overnight explosion of fame, through the record deals and the arena tours and the Grammy stages. She carried it through songs like Piece by Piece, which wasn't just a ballad. It was a confession, a reckoning with a father who never came back, and a quiet, terrified prayer that someone someday would prove that love didn't always leave. Brandon Blackstock seemed to be that proof. When she first met him in 2006, the encounter was brief, a rehearsal for the Academy of Country Music Awards, a handshake, a few exchanged words. Nothing that announced itself as fate, but something about him lingered, and when their paths crossed again years later, Kelly allowed herself something she rarely permitted: hope. By December 2012, he had proposed. By October 2013, they were married. By 2014, they had a daughter, River Rose. By 2016, a son, Remington Alexander. From the outside, it looked like the ending Kelly had always been writing toward. The girl from the broken home, building a whole one of her own. But there is a particular kind of loneliness that lives inside a marriage, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, gradually. The way a room grows cold when someone leaves a window open. You don't notice the draft at first. And then one day, you realize you've been freezing for years. Kelly has spoken carefully about what those years felt like. She described living, at times, as if she were already a single mother, making decisions alone, navigating the emotional weight of their household without the partnership she had believed she was signing up for. Friends who knew her during that period would later describe a woman who had learned to perform happiness the way she performed everything else. Convincingly, completely, with full commitment. Nobody in the audience could see the effort it took. What she has only recently begun to speak about, and what almost nobody had heard before, was the specific nature of what unraveled between them. Not just the emotional distance, not just the loneliness, but the way certain truths about Brandon surfaced slowly, in layers. The way damage always does when someone has worked very hard to conceal it. There were things about the man she had married that Kelly had protected, fiercely. Even as the divorce proceedings grew ugly, even as the legal battle over the Montana ranch turned bitter and prolonged, even as the courts awarded her primary custody of their children and eventually ordered Brandon off the property he had clung to. Even through all of that, Kelly stayed measured, stayed professional, kept the most painful details locked behind a door she wasn't sure she'd ever open. The divorce was finalized in 2022. Brandon moved on. Kelly moved to New York City, restarted her talk show, rebuilt herself in public, one episode at a time. She was funny. She was warm. She was, by every observable measure, doing well. But the Chemistry album told a different story. Released in June 2023, it was the most raw, unguarded thing Kelly had ever recorded. Critics called it a career-defining work. What they were really responding to was something harder to name: the sound of a person finally allowing themselves to say what they had spent years swallowing. Songs about betrayal that cut past the generic vocabulary of heartbreak. Lines that didn't read like artistic metaphor. Lines that read like receipts. People listened and wondered what they meant. Kelly knew exactly what they meant. What she has finally begun to confirm, in fragments, in interviews, in moments when the careful restraint she'd practiced for years slipped just enough to reveal what was underneath, is that the Brandon Blackstock the world believed it knew was not entirely real. The image of the devoted partner, the attentive father, the man who had represented everything her own father never was. That image had been, in significant ways, a construction, one she had participated in building because she needed it to be true, because the alternative was too close to a story she had already survived once and couldn't bear to be living through again. There were financial realities within their marriage that Kelly only fully grasped after the relationship had already collapsed. There were professional decisions made on her behalf, or claimed to have been made on her behalf, that served other interests more than hers. There were dynamics of dependency and control that wore the clothing of partnership, that looked from every external angle like love. And there was a silence she had kept about how much she had known, how long she had known it, how many times she had explained it away to herself because the cost of seeing it clearly felt unsurvivable. She has spoken about the period after the divorce filing as the loneliest of her life, not because she lost him, but because she realized, in the absence of the noise their life together had generated, exactly what she had been living inside. When you spend years in a certain kind of marriage, you can lose the ability to distinguish between what you chose and what you endured. The two become indistinguishable. The sorting out comes later, in the quiet, and it is not clean. Kelly did that sorting out, slowly, painfully, on national television, in therapy that she has openly acknowledged, in the album she made in the rawness of it, in the late nights with her children, when she sat with the full weight of what she was now carrying alone and decided, again and again, to keep going. The thing about Brandon Blackstock that nobody knew, that Kelly herself, in certain important ways, had not allowed herself to fully know while she was still inside the marriage, is that the person she had needed him to be and the person he actually was were never quite the same. That the emotional architecture of their relationship had been built, in part, on a version of him she had constructed from her own desperate need for proof that she was lovable, that she was worth staying for. Her father had not stayed. Brandon, it turned out, had not been staying either, not in the ways that mattered. The version of their story that the public absorbed was the version Kelly controlled, because she is disciplined, and because she is kind, and because she understood that her children would one day read everything that was written about their father. She has never wanted to be the one to define him for them. That restraint is not weakness. It is the most sophisticated kind of strength, the kind that costs something real. But she is speaking now, not with malice, not with the sharp pleasure of finally being believed, but with the quiet steadiness of a woman who has done the work of understanding her own life and no longer needs to carry someone else's secrets alongside her own. She moved to New York and started over. She built something new in the daylight instead of maintaining something broken in the dark. Her children are with her. Her voice is still extraordinary. And the woman who once stood on the American Idol stage in white pants she'd bought without guidance, terrified and unnamed, has become something her younger self could never have imagined. Not just a survivor of everything that tried to diminish her, but a person who finally, after all of it, decided she was allowed to tell the truth. Nobody knew what she carried inside that marriage. Now, slowly, carefully, on her own terms, she is letting them know.